Now turn to Section 1. Section 1. A woman has just arrived at a shopping mall with her children. You will hear her talking to a man at the information desk. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6 and the floor plan of the shopping mall. Now listen and answer questions 1 to 6.
Good morning. Can I help you?
Yes, I've never been here before and I've just got a few questions about where a few places are here.
Fine. Here's a floor plan of the mall. You can take that with you. But if you have any questions, I'd be very happy to help.
Well, I'm afraid I always find these floor plans a bit confusing. So could you just show me exactly where we are on this?
No problem. Here we are at the information desk, right in the middle, next to the escalators.
The man says they are at the information desk and that it is in the middle, next to the escalator. Therefore, C has been written next to the example on the question paper. Now continue with questions 1 to 6.
Right. Now, I heard there's a children's play centre where you can leave your children while you do the shopping.
That's right. You can see it on the floor plan. It's in the corner, to the left of the supermarket. There are plenty of toys for them to play with there. Also, there's fresh fruit to eat, and they can have fun with the other children.
Sounds good, doesn't it, kids? I was thinking I might take them to have their hair cut first. Is that the hairdresser between the furniture shop and the children's clothes shop?
Yes, it is. They do children's haircuts as well.
Oh, lovely. Now, my little boy's going to a friend's birthday party next week and we wanted to buy a present. Do you know if there are any stores that might have things a 7-year-old boy would like?
Oh, yes. There's a toy store right next to the shoe shop. They've got a good range of toys. I'm sure you'll find something for a child of that age. I often buy things there myself. The prices are quite reasonable.
Oh, that's good to hear. Oh, and also, are there any toilets on this floor?
Yes, they're in a bit of a hidden corner. You just go past the bookstore. You can see they sell newspapers there too, and down the corridor.
Oh, yes, I see. I'd better take them there before we go to the hairdresser. What else do I need to do? Oh, yeah, I've got to buy some credit from a mobile phone. Can I do that at the phone kiosk over there near those benches?
Yes, you can. You can also do it at the supermarket if you want.
Right. Now, we've just come up from the car park, but we took the escalator. I might have a lot of things to carry later on, so I was wondering if there's an elevator.
Yes, it's next to the computer store, near the top of the stairs.
Oh, yes, I can see it now.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
Oh, when I parked the car, I couldn't see how much you have to pay for parking.
It's free for the first 2 hours, but after that it's $3 an hour.
Oh, well, I think with all the things we have to do, we might be here for more than 2 hours. So if you park there for 3 hours altogether, you have to pay $3. And if it's 4 hours, you pay $6 and so on.
Yes, that's right.
Uh-huh. How about the children's play centre? Is there any charge for leaving your children there?
Oh no, that's a free service of the shopping mall. However, there's a policy that the children have to be at least 18 months old.
Oh, my youngest is just 10 months old, but I'd rather keep her with me anyway. Also, we might need to get something to eat later. Is there any place to buy lunch?
Oh yes, you can get all kinds of things at the food court, from snacks to fast food to healthy meals. There's a really good range. It's 2 floors up on level 5. It's best to take the elevator.
Do you know if they have pizza? Both my kids really love pizza.
Yes, they do. Oh, did you know you can watch a movie here too?
Yes, I've heard there's a cinema on the top floor. There might be something on that my kids would be interested in.
Yeah, there are a couple of children's films on at the moment.
Well, thank you very much. You've been a great help.
My pleasure.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to section 2. You will hear a project manager talking to voluntary workers about the tasks that need to be done. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 14.
Good morning. It's great to see so many people here. Thank you all very much for coming. Well, as you know, the community gardens at Hadley Park are really not looking as good as they should. Quite bad, really. And although the local council has a budget to deal with some of the problems, we do need volunteers for other tasks. If you don't mind, I'm going to divide you into 2 groups. So everyone on this side of the room is Group A, and the rest of you are Group B. So, Group A, there are a couple of things we'd like you to help with. First of all, don't worry about any litter or empty bottles you see lying about. One of the local schools has offered to help out with that as part of their own environmental project. The priority for you will be to give us a hand with the new wooden fencing. It needs constructing along parts of the bicycle track, as there are parts which have now fallen down or broken, as I'm sure you've seen. You've probably also noticed that some of the pathways that come from the bicycle track are quite narrow, and there are plans to make them wider, but the council will be dealing with that later in the year. And they've also promised to produce some informational signs about the plants in the gardens. Hopefully, they'll be up in a few weeks' time. The other thing we're doing is getting rid of some of the foreign species that are growing in the gardens and putting back some native plants and trees. So you'll be doing some digging for us and getting those into the ground. So, Group A, there's some items you'll need to bring along with you. I was going to say raincoats, but the forecast has changed, so you can leave those at home. I'd definitely recommend a strong pair of boots. Waterproof would be best. It's quite muddy at the moment, and your own gloves would also be advisable. Tools will be available, spades and hammers, that kind of thing. You just need to make sure they go back in the trucks. And, there's no need to worry about food and drink, as we'll be supplying sandwiches and coffee, possibly some biscuits even.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you will have some time to look at the questions 15 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 15 to 20.
OK, Group B, your turn. Does everyone have a copy of the plan? Oh, great. OK. We'll all be meeting in the car park. That's on the bottom of the plan. See? Now, if you've been assigned to the vegetable beds, to get there, you go out of the car park and go up the footpath until you reach the circle of trees. There they are, in the middle of the plan. And you see that the footpath goes all the way around them. Well, on the left-hand side of that circular footpath, there's a short track which takes you directly to the vegetable beds. You can see a bamboo fence marked just above them. All right? OK, if you're helping out with the beehives, pay attention. Look again at the circle of trees in the middle of the plan and the footpath that goes around them. On the right side of that circle, you can see that the footpath goes off in an easterly direction, heading towards the right-hand side of the plan. And then the path splits into two, and you can either go up or down. You want the path that heads down. And at the end of this, you see two areas divided by a bamboo fence. And as we're looking at the plan, the beehives are on the right of the fence. The smaller section, I mean. Now, don't worry, all the bees have been removed. You just need to transport the hives back to the car park. OK, for the seating, look at the circular footpath. At the top of it, there's a path that goes from there and takes you up to the seating area, alongside the bicycle track, and with a good view of the island, I suppose. OK, if you're volunteering for the adventure playground area, let's start from the car park again and go up the footpath, but then you want the first left turn. Go up there, and then you see there's a short path that goes off to the right. Go down there, and that's the adventure playground area, above the bamboo fence. That fence does need repairing, I'm afraid. Right, what else? Oh, yes, the sand area. We've got that circular footpath in the middle. Find the track that goes east, towards the right-hand side of the plan, and where that track divides, you need the little path that goes up towards the bicycle track. The sand area is just above the bamboo fence there. And finally, the pond area. So it's on the left-hand side of your plan, towards the top, just above the fruit bushes and to the left of the little path. OK, as I said already, hopefully we'll be...
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to Section 3. Section 3. You will hear two students talking to their teacher about a seminar paper they are preparing for their population studies class. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen and answer questions 21 to 25.
So, how's your seminar paper going?
Oh, it's almost ready. My head's just full of statistics at the moment.
Is there anything you found particularly interesting?
Yeah. For instance, about where people choose to live when they migrate to Australia. The focus of our talk is on migration to Sydney, but we found we needed to look briefly at migration to other parts of Australia as well.
Most migrants go to the big cities, but it isn't the same for all nationalities. For instance, over the last 5 years, with the British, only about 1/3 of them altogether went to Sydney and Melbourne.
So where did most of them go?
Oh, all over the place. But for some reason quite a few ended up over in Perth.
Oh, that's not a bad place to live.
No, but with the Chinese, 26% of them choose to live in Melbourne and 58% in Sydney.
Really? Do you have any idea why the Chinese and British have such different settlement patterns?
Well, not really. Sometimes it's hard to find out exactly why people choose to live where they do. There's a thriving Lebanese community in Melbourne, but more than 7 out of 10 people from Lebanon were drawn to Sydney.
I see. So you've covered groups from Europe, East Asia and the Middle East. Do you have anything on people from other regions?
Yes. When we went through data from the Department of Immigration and the Bureau of Statistics, we found that in the case of the Malaysians, for some reason only a minority chose Sydney and Melbourne, but I don't know exactly where most of them ended up. I think quite a few of them were attracted to Queensland because of the climate.
Yeah, it must be hard for people coming from a tropical region to get used to colder winters. What about the New Zealanders?
Well, they don't need a visa for Australia, so they're counted separately from all other nationalities. But the vast bulk of them have ended up in Sydney. You'd think that Melbourne would be more to their liking because its climate's more like what they're used to, and the distance from New Zealand to Melbourne is about the same.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
You also looked into why people choose the places they do, didn't you?
Yes. Well, people often go where the work is. I mean, it's no use finding a nice place to live if you're going to be unemployed. But there's a more decisive factor, and that is that people generally like to live near their friends and relatives, and with people from their own country, so they won't be so isolated. And they do that despite the higher housing prices in the larger cities.
Yeah, rents are getting ridiculous. But hasn't Sydney always attracted people? I mean, even people born elsewhere in Australia.
Well, historically that was the case, but even though Sydney's grown a lot recently, there's been hardly any increase in the number of Australian-born people living in Sydney.
Why is that? I mean, I can understand why people would be leaving. A lot of people feel Sydney's getting too crowded and hectic.
But that can't be the reason. because they often end up in places such as southeast Queensland, where the infrastructure simply isn't coping with the rapid population growth and faster pace of life.
The research shows that the ones leaving Sydney are particularly middle-aged and elderly people who own the place they live in. By selling their Sydney home when they retire and buying and living in a cheaper one elsewhere, they then have more funds left over.
It must be difficult making that shift at their age.
I think moving or migrating's hard for anyone.
Quite right. But what effect is migration having?
Well, there are all kinds of effects. But sociologists talk about a growing gap between Sydney and Melbourne on the one hand and the rest of the country on the other. You see, the most recent data shows that 60% of the overseas arrivals went to those two cities, even though Sydney and Melbourne combined have got just 40% of the country's population.
But you've got to remember that Australia is one of the most urbanised countries in the world. A good 50% of the population live in the state capitals, not including the urban fringes. Is anything being done to promote growth in other regions?
Well, the government's got several proposals. We need more people in rural areas, but no one's suggesting that we encourage farmers to migrate to Australia because agriculture is very capital intensive in this country. But the government's thinking about having lower tax rates on private firms that employ newly arrived migrants in towns outside Sydney and Melbourne. Of course, these days the government doesn't want to actually provide jobs for them, but they are willing to favour employers who employ them.
Do you think that'd work?
I don't know. There's nothing to stop them moving to one of the two big cities if they feel like it.
Exactly.
In fact, the statistics don't give the full picture. When they migrate, people very often initially live outside of Sydney. So in the statistics, they're recorded as having settled outside Sydney. But then after a while, many make the move to Sydney. So the real picture's even more out of balance than what the statistics say.
Statistics really can be a slippery thing sometimes, can't they?
That's for sure.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to section 4. You will hear a lecture about Maori kite making. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Well, good morning, everyone. As you know, we've been looking at different kinds of art and craft that were practiced by the Maori people of New Zealand, at least before the Europeans began to arrive in the 18th century. So, the focus of this lecture is kite making, how the kites were made, their appearance, and the purposes they served. Well, let's start with the way they were made. As with other Maori artistic traditions, kite making involved certain rituals. So, firstly, only priests were allowed to fly and handle the largest, most sacred kites. There were rules too, for the size and scale of the kites that the priests had to follow, and during the preparation of both small and large kites, food was strictly forbidden. In terms of appearance, kites were frequently designed in the image of a native bird, or a Maori god, and sometimes, perhaps less often, a well-known hero. You can imagine that when Maori first arrived in the new country, in New Zealand, it may have taken some time to find suitable materials for their kites. But, through trial and error no doubt, they found plants and trees that provided bark and even roots that they could use to make the frames and wings of their kites. And after the frame had been constructed, the kite then had to be decorated. For this, the priests used long grasses, and these, when the kite was in the air, would stream along behind it. They also used a variety of feathers to add colour to their creations. Well, all this meant it was easy to see a kite in the sky, but you could also hear Maori kites. They could be quite noisy indeed, and this was because some priests liked to hang a long row of shells from the kite. You can imagine how they'd rattle and clatter in the wind, how they might completely capture your attention. As I said before, the most common image was probably a bird, and that's the same for other kite-making cultures. But the kites were designed in particular shapes. So, there were kites that were triangular, rectangular, and also shaped like a diamond. And some of them were so large it would actually require several men to operate them. Some of the kites were also covered in patterns, and to make these patterns, the Maori used different pigments of red and black, and these were either made from a charcoal base or from red-brown clay which had been combined with oil obtained from a local species of shark. Now, before I forget, if you have a chance, do visit the Auckland Museum, because they have the last surviving Birdman kite on display. This is the kind of kite that has a wooden mask at the top of the frame. It's a mask of a human head, and you can clearly see it has a tattoo and also a set of teeth. Quite impressive, and a good example of Maori craftsmanship and symbolism. Right, turning to the purpose and function of the kites. They certainly had multiple uses. Primarily, the flying of kites was a way of communicating with the gods, and when the kites rose into the air, the Maori used them to deliver messages, perhaps requesting a good harvest, good fortune in war, a successful hunting expedition. So these kites were incredibly valuable to a community, treasured objects that one generation would pass to the next. People would also fly kites for other reasons. For example, to attract the attention of a neighbouring village. This was done when a meeting was required between Maori elders, a convenient method indeed. And finally, when it comes to war, there are traditional stories that describe how when a Maori warrior found himself surrounded by his enemies, a kite could actually provide the possibility of escape. The kites were powerful enough to take a man up into the air, and for this reason, they could also be used to lower him into enemy fortifications so that an attack could begin from the inside. Well, I'm happy to say there seems to be a revival and growing interest in kite making, and